The ability to speak on part one of the Education Amendment Bill number 4, and I was on the select committee that heard the submissions on this bill, and I think that the debate on part one so far has focused on what I think was a key part of what submitters wanted to talk to us about on the bill, and that was the student levies part of it. Because that was, while this I guess you could call it an omnibus bill, deals with a range of things, and the previous speaker certainly spoke about the private training establishment part of it. What most of the submitters wanted to talk to us about was the student levies part of it, which is in fact covered by part one. And what they wanted to say about the student levies part of it was that they all did actually support those changes to the Education Act. And they came at it from a range of options, actually, because it was both the institutions who came to do submissions themselves and students affected by those levies as well. And just so we're clear, because there are a range of payments that students make in the tertiary environment at the moment. So there is the course fee, the student fee. That's obviously a compulsory fee. It's something they have to pay in order to take part in the course. But then there is also a compulsory student levy that is put on as well by institutions. And the purpose of that levy is not to pay for the costs of providing the education, but to provide for some additional services that the institution wishes to have to support students. Now, what started happening, and the background to why this bill is so necessary, is that in the course of the last year, student levies increased hugely and quite suddenly right across the country, up to 600% increases in one instance, and that was Canterbury University, where that occurred last year. And I think it's interesting to note, Mr Chair, that when we heard this bill, of course, Canterbury University was in much better shape than it is today through actions not of its own making, of course. But imagine what the student levy discussion might look like at Canterbury University in the forthcoming financial year and the financial years to come. Because I think that those are exactly the reasons why we need to have transparency around how the student levy is set, and certainly applaud that and want to support that. However, we need to understand the root cause of what's gone on here. Why is it that across the board, before earthquakes, before any of those natural disasters hit some of these institutions, why was it that universities and polytechnics and private training establishments felt the need to increase student levies to that degree? 103%, 600%? That needs investigation. And what the submitters could tell us was that, yes, they were looking to have a more user pays regime from the students. Why is that? Because the government funding going into their sector has been so squeezed that they had to look elsewhere for actually making up the difference. It's been so squeezed. And that's why tertiary institutions were bringing in a more user pays regime, and they were using the compulsory student levy in which to do that. Now, I am surprised that the government's not riling and fighting against the idea that universities can actually even have a compulsory student levy, because they seem to think that that is a rather large evil. And in talking about evil, I do want to acknowledge that we can't consider this bill and its student levies approach in part one in isolation to its twin. The twin piece of legislation that is coming through this House at the same time, the one that we know of as voluntary student membership, because they are twins that you've got to look at together in terms of the provision of student services. Because there is no doubt with the evil twin, the voluntary student management bill, that what that is going to do is actually gut student associations in a way where they cannot provide the student services that they currently provide and the student advocacy that they currently provide for those students. So that will be a natural outcome of the evil twin. But this debate's about the good twin. And this bill is the good twin, Mr Chair. Mr Chair?
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, because I need to talk about the good twin. I've just described the evil twin, but the good twin is this bill. And what this bill aims to do is to make sure that tertiary institutions can't continue to increase with no transparency the student levy. And so, well, I am supporting the good twin. I'm supporting the good twin, Mr Hanari. But I'm not supporting the bad twin, the evil twin, the one that will mean that student services will actually suffer. Because what this bill gives the Minister the ability to do is to actually cap the level of the student levy, the compulsory student levy that tertiary institutions can and do charge, and we're charging at ever-increasing rates. And it does cap that, and that is the right thing to do, because in this environment, with cost of living skyrocketing like it is in New Zealand, the last thing that students need is to face that ever-increasing spiral of increased levies for basic student services. But here's the rub. Here's the rub, because if the evil twin is passed through this Parliament, then we know that student services will suffer as a result. Who's going to pick that up? Well, the government is not going to provide more funding for that, unless the Minister wants to get to his feet and give us that commitment today, and I certainly would welcome that. So who's it going to be left to? It's going to be left to the tertiary institutions. They are going to need to pick up student services that the student associations will no longer be able to afford to do because of the evil twin bill. So that is why we need to talk about the twin bills together, because student services are at risk here. Student services will fall down the middle, because the evil twin bill will actually stop the student associations from having the resources to be able to provide those services, and with this bill, the good twin bill actually stops the tertiary institution from increasing levies to provide better services. So the outcome will be that a whole range of student services will not be available for students to support them through their education. And so that's the dilemma. That's the dilemma for Labour, because we want to support this. We want to support this bill, and we do, because we do believe that there should be transparency in those compulsory levies that are put together by tertiary institutions, and we do believe that they should be kept, because we know that the increasing user pays regime that's going on under this government, that's forcing more and more costs onto students, is not the way forward. And so this is the first time that the government's acknowledging it, but they're not dealing with the root cause. The root cause is that tertiary institutions are scrambling to look for other sources of revenue. They're going down a user pays regime because their funding has been so squeezed for providing the basic course materials and the programs that the students pay the fees for. So we've got students paying fees for the courses and the programs, and then we've got them paying the student levy. And certainly that is the part that Part 1 deals with, and all of the submitters said that this was the right way to go, albeit that the institutions, when they came to see us, said yes, but. They said yes, students should have transparency over what the levy is put towards and how that's made up, and yes, there should be the ability for the Minister to cap it. But, they said, the Minister needs to be very clear that that will put tertiary institutions in a very, very difficult funding environment, in a very difficult funding situation where they will have to make decisions about cutting services, where they will have to make decisions about not being able to provide what they have in the past. And, well, Mr Hanari says that's enough. Mr Hanari needs to understand the position that his government is putting tertiary institutions and students in by passing this bill in conjunction with the other bill that they seem so intent on forcing through before the election. And I do, as the Deputy Chair of the Education Select Committee, I do want to respond to what the chairperson of the Select Committee said earlier about when he roundly criticised what he called a filibuster on the Royal Society Bill. The Royal Society Bill. And I just want to remind that member, and I'm sure he knows this, that that bill doesn't change one thing for the way the Royal Society operates today. doesn't change one thing, so that point needs to be made. And the Royal Society are very happy to have had the amount of debate that they have had on their bill. Mr. Chair.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.